A black old man quietly approaches a small-town police station seeking help, only to be greeted with mockery. The officer's arrogance fills the room, while the old man's silent dignity unsettles those watching. A symbolic act flips the tension. Hinting that the stranger may not be as powerless as he seems. "We don't serve your kind here," the officer sneered, his voice sharp, enough to cut through the dusty air of the small-town precinct. The waiting room fell silent, a mother clutching. Her child turned her eyes downward. A young man froze mid-step, holding paperwork, unsure if he should stay or leave. The fluorescent light above flickered, casting a harsh glow on the scene unfolding at the front desk. Behind the counter stood Officer Grant Broad, smirking, his badge catching the light like a weapon. His laughter echoed, careless and cruel, bouncing off the pale green walls. He leaned back in his chair, boot tapping the desk edge, radiating the arrogance of a man who thought the uniform gave him the right to measure human worth. The target of his mockery stood motionless, an old black man, his back slightly bent with years, but his presence strangely commanding. His clothes were simple, worn from time, but his shoes were polished, each step deliberate. His face carried lines of history, eyes steady as a horizon. "Did you hear me, old man?" Grant pressed. Louder now. "This place isn't a hangout for people like you. Go back where you came from." No response. The old man simply set a small, leather-bound notebook on the counter. Its corners were frayed, pages yellowed, but it was handled with care as if it carried something greater than words. Grant snatched it up, flipping through with mock interest. "What's this? Diary letters? Don't tell me you walked in here thinking anyone's going to read your scribbles." He tore a page, crumpled it, and tossed it onto the floor with a laugh. Gasps rippled from the silent witnesses. The old man's hand tightened on his cane, but he didn't lash out. He didn't even flinch. Instead, he spoke, voice low but firm, carrying weight beyond its volume. "Every word in there," he said, eyes never leaving Grant's, "was written for a day like this." Grant chuckled, but his laugh rang thinner now. "A day like this? You think you scare me? You're nobody." The old man leaned closer, not threatening, but steady like a tide that could not be stopped. "Respect doesn't come with a badge," he said slowly, "but losing it can take only a moment." The words seemed to hang in the air, chilling even those who didn't understand why. The mother in the corner pulled her child closer. The young man with paperwork swallowed hard, sensing a shift he couldn't yet name. Grant tried to laugh again, louder, harsher, to drown the weight of the silence pressing on him. "Go on, old man. I'll walk out that door before I throw you out myself." But the old man didn't move. Instead, he extended his hand toward the crumpled page on the floor, not bending to pick it up himself, a small gesture. But it demanded something, demanded that Grant face the ugliness of what he had done. For the first time, Grant hesitated. The old man's voice returned, softer now, but sharper than steel. "You'll learn soon enough, officer, that mocking what you don't understand can cost you more than pride." And with that, he turned slow, deliberately leaving the notebook on the counter as if it were bait. Or perhaps a warning. The room stayed frozen, every pair of eyes locked on the old man's back as he pushed open the precinct doors. For a moment, sunlight spilled in, casting his silhouette long and unyielding across the floor. The last thing heard before the door shut was Grant's muttered laugh. Thin, defensive, almost nervous, but outside, unseen to everyone inside. 3 black SUVs rolled slowly into town, tires crunching gravel. Soldiers in crisp uniforms sat inside, silent, waiting. The door swung shut, leaving the faint echo of the old man's words behind. For a moment, the station seemed suspended, caught between silence and sound. Then Officer Grant slapped the counter with his palm and let out a booming laugh. "Did you see that? Some washed-up old man thinks he can walk in here and lecture? Me." He shook his head, eyes glittering with arrogance. "Not in my town. Not in my station." A few of the younger officers nearby forced chuckles, the kind that cracked at the edges. They shifted in their chairs, his eyes flicking toward one another as if to confirm they weren't alone in their unease. The young man with paperwork cleared his throat nervously. Sir, he didn't seem like just anybody. Grant turned on. Him, voice sharp as a blade. And what's that supposed to mean? You siding with him? The boy dropped his gaze. No, sir. Just saying. He carried himself different. Like what? Grant barked, stepping closer. His boots echoed against the tiled floor, the sound heavy, deliberate, like he mattered. Listen, kid. People like him don't matter. Not here. Not anywhere. The words stung the air, thick with their cruelty. The mother in the corner shifted, uncomfortably pulling her child's hood over his head, as though trying to shield him from the venom in the room. Her eyes followed the old man's abandoned notebook on the counter, as though it were alive, still humming with the weight of his presence. Grant noticed her glance and snatched the notebook up again. He waved it in the air, mocking. See this? Just scribbles from a bitter relic. I should toss it in the trash where it belongs. But as he flipped through, something caught his eye, an emblem stamped faintly on the inside cover. His laughter faltered. For a second, he squinted at it, but then quickly snapped the book shut, masking his pause with another hollow laugh. Waste of time, he muttered, tossing it back on the desk. You'd think he was somebody important walking in here with. That stick and that attitude, he's nothing. Nothing but an old man. Yet even as he said it, his voice carried less certainty. Outside, sunlight poured over Main Street. The black SUVs parked at the far end of town looked out of place among the brick storefronts and flickering neon signs. A mechanic wiping his hands on a rag paused mid-step, staring as uniformed soldiers climbed out, boots striking pavement in unison. Their faces were unreadable, eyes hidden behind dark lenses. Inside, whispers stirred. Two officers at the back leaned toward each other. You ever seen him before? One asked quietly. The other shook his head. No, but he didn't act like a stranger. He acted like he owned the place. Grant caught the murmurs and slammed his hand on the desk again. Quiet. Don't let that fool get in your heads. He's just another old man looking for attention. His words were forceful, but his jaw tightened, the muscles in his neck betraying his irritation. The notebook sat there, unmoving. Its presence grew heavier with every passing second. The mother finally rose, guiding her son toward the door. Before leaving, she looked back at Grant, her voice low but pointed. My father used to say, when a man walks with that much calm, it's because he's walked through fire before. You might want to think about that. Grant's smirk faltered. Get out of here, he muttered, waving her away. But her words lingered. On the street outside, the old man walked slowly. Cane, striking pavement in steady rhythm. Each step carried weight, but not struggle rather, the weight of memory, of history. His eyes were fixed ahead where the soldiers were gathering, forming a quiet line across the town square. He did not stop. He did not speak. But the air shifted, as though the ground itself was preparing for something larger than the officers. Laughter, something none of the townsfolk could yet name, and inside the precinct. Officer Grant found his hands trembling ever so slightly as he reached for his coffee, spilling a drop on the counter. He cursed under his breath, but his heart beat faster than he wanted anyone to notice. The ripples had begun, the steady tap of the old man's cane echoed against the cracked pavement as he moved down Main Street. Each strike of wood against stone seemed to mark time itself, pulling curious faces from behind windows and door frames. Shopkeepers paused mid-sale, children stilled mid-play, and the rhythm of the town shifted into an uncertain hush behind him. Shadows stretched long across the sunlit street as soldiers emerged from the black SUVs. They did not march, not yet, but they moved with precision, boots falling heavy, the sound resonating with quiet authority.
Their uniforms bore insignias
most townsfolk had never seen up close, and though no orders were spoken, the air thickened with the weight of their presence. Who is he? A butcher whispered to his wife, wiping blood-stained hands on his apron as he leaned out the door. Someone who walks like he's been saluted before, she replied, voice tinged with awe. At the precinct, Officer Grant paced restlessly. Hiss. Laughter came louder now, more forced, as though trying to drown out the silence outside. Look at this town acting like they just saw a ghost, all for some wrinkled has-been with a stick. He jabbed a finger toward the window where a cluster of townsfolk had gathered. Fools, every one of them. One of the junior officers shifted in his seat. Sir, maybe we should find out who he is, just in case. Grant snapped his head around, glare cutting sharp. You suggesting he's somebody? Don't let him play you? That's what these people do, walk around acting like they matter? He's nobody, and I'll prove it. He grabbed the old man's notebook again, flipping it open with impatient hands. The faint emblem inside caught his eye once more, a crest pressed into the page like a ghost of authority. This time he looked at it longer, his jaw tightening. What is that? One of the officers asked cautiously. Nothing, Grant barked, slamming the book shut. Just some scribble. Probably stole it. But his voice carried less certainty than before. Out on the street, the old man reached the town's square. He paused, resting lightly on his cane, and turned his gaze toward the soldiers. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to hold still. Then, one soldier stepped forward, adjusting the brim of his cap. He did not salute, not yet, but his chin dipped almost imperceptibly. A gesture of recognition too subtle for most to notice. The old man gave a slight nod in return, as though acknowledging an old rhythm, a silent code between men who had seen the same storms. The crowd murmured. Did you see that? He knows them? Know they know him? Inside, Grant's fists clenched. He slammed the notebook on the counter and barked, enough of this circus. I'll drag him back in here myself if I have to. But when he strode toward the door, another officer, Sergeant Miller, older, seasoned, blocked his way. His voice was calm, but edged with quiet authority. Grant, don't. Grant froze, incredulous. What did you just say? Don't? Miller repeated. His eyes flicked toward the window, where the soldiers stood like sentinels in the square. There's something you don't understand here. Something bigger than your pride. Grant shoved past him, jaw set. I don't care who he is. I'll regret walking into my station. Yet as he pushed the doors open, the sound that greeted him made his breath hitch. Boots, dozens of them. Soldiers shifting, forming rank in subtle, deliberate movement, like a storm front gathering on the horizon. The townsfolk fell silent. Every pair of eyes watching, waiting. The old man did not move. He stood in the center of the square, cane planted, shoulders straightened. For the first time, the lines of age on his face looked less like weakness and more like carved stone testament to endurance. Wow. 2 battles weathered. Grant's smirk faltered, but he forced it back, hiding unease behind bluster. What's this? Supposed to be some kind of parade? He scoffed, loud enough for the crowd to hear. But the laughter that followed rang hollow, swallowed quickly by the heavy silence that wrapped the square, and then just for an instant, the wind shifted, carrying with it a memory of drums, of salutes, of commands shouted across battlefields long past. The old man's gaze was steady, and in it lay something Grant could not name. Something that made the air in his lungs feel heavier than before. The soldiers had not yet saluted, but the town already knew something was coming. The square had never been so quiet. Even the hum of traffic along the far road seemed to fade, replaced by the rhythmic shift of boots as soldiers aligned themselves shoulder to shoulder. Their movements were clean, precise, without wasted energy.
Ow.
Each man knew his place, and together they formed a line that seemed carved out of iron. At the center stood the old man, cane planted firmly, body still as stone. He didn't flinch, didn't blink. His silence carried more command than Grant's shouting ever had. Whispers rippled through the crowd gathering along the sidewalks. Why are they here? They're soldiers. Real soldiers. Do you think they came for him? Children clung to their mothers' skirts, sensing the gravity in the air though they couldn't name it. A shopkeeper locked his door without realizing why, as if instinct told him something historic was unfolding. Grant stormed into the square, chest puffed, voice loud. All right, that's enough standing around. This isn't a parade ground. He barked, pointing at the old man. Need to move along before I drag you back to the gutter you came from. The words fell flat, No one laughed. No one nodded. Instead, all eyes shifted toward the soldiers. Their faces gave nothing away, but their silence was louder than any threat. One soldier adjusted his stance. Another's hand brushed the brim of his cap. The movements were small, but to those who noticed, they carried weight. These weren't strangers milling about. They were waiting, watching. Grant's lips curled in frustration. He turned to the townsfolk, shouting louder, "Don't just stand there gawking. You people think this man's a hero? He's nothing but a liar with a cane?" But the people no longer echoed him. Their eyes avoided his, drifting back to the old man who stood without a word. Dignity radiating like a beacon. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mama, why aren't the soldiers talking?" she whispered. Sometimes silence says more than shouting ever could. Grant's face flushed, turned on Sergeant Miller, who had followed him out of the precinct. "You see what's happening? They're all looking at him like he's somebody. Shut this down before it gets out of hand." Miller's jaw tightened. His eyes remained on the old man. "Maybe he is somebody." The words sliced through Grant. He stepped close, hissing under his breath, "Don't you dare undermine me." But Miller didn't move. His eyes flicked toward the soldiers again. "And don't undermine yourself." Grant clenched his fist, spinning back toward the square. "Fine, you want a show? Let's have one." He strode up to the old man, standing barely a foot away, his smirk sharp and ugly. "You think standing here makes you important? That these people are impressed?" The old man finally spoke, voice steady as the ground beneath their feet. "I don't need to prove who I am, but you've already proven who you are." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The words weren't loud, but they cut deeper than any. Shout Grunt forced a laugh, though it sounded brittle. "You've got quite the mouth for an old relic." He jabbed a finger toward the soldiers. "And you, what's the meaning of this? You here to babysit a stranger?" The line of soldiers did not move. One mantle, broad-shouldered, shifted forward half a step. His boots struck the ground with a sound that seemed to reverberate through the square. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The crowd stirred, murmuring louder now. "Did you see that?" He moved for him. "They're here because of him." Grant's laughter faltered altogether. His hand twitched toward his holster, then thought better of it. He clenched it into a fist instead, hiding the tremor. The old man's gaze never left him, calm, unyielding, and behind that calm, a promise of truth yet to be revealed. The silence of the soldiers stretched on, pressing down on every heart in the square. And for the first time, Officer Grant's voice, once booming with arrogant certainty, sounded small. The balance was shifting, and everyone could feel it. The air in the square was so heavy it seemed to hum. The soldiers remained motionless. In their iron line, their silence more commanding than any shouted order. But then one small, deliberate act cracked the silence wide open. The tall soldier at the center lifted his hand to his brow. Crisp and sharp, the salute of a man who had not forgotten discipline. His motion was exact, measured, flawless. It cut through the air like a blade, and he held it. Gasps swept through the crowd. Others clutched their children tighter. Men removed their caps instinctively, and even those who didn't fully understand. The gesture felt its weight in their bones. The old man did not move at first. He only stood there, cane steady, eyes locked with the soldiers. The salute hung between them like a bridge across years of history. A silent recognition of rank, of respect, of something far greater than what Officer Grant's badge could ever represent. Finally, the old man gave the slightest nod. It was not grand, not showy, but in that subtle gesture lay command, acknowledgement, and a quiet authority that needed no words. The square erupted in whispers. They're saluting him. My God, who is he? He must have been someone. Big someone they still remember. Officer Grant's face went red with fury. "Enough," he roared, voice cracking. "This circus is over. You hear me?" He pointed a shaking finger at the soldiers. "You don't answer to him. You answer to me. I'm the law here." But his words rang thin, swallowed by the murmurs of awe surrounding the old man. For the first time, Grant's authority looked like what it was: fragile, performative, built on intimidation rather than respect. He turned toward the crowd, desperate. Don't let him fool you. It's nothing but an old man playing dress-up with history. You think a salute changes who he is? It's meaningless. Yet his voice betrayed him. Each word was louder, shriller, as though he was trying to convince himself as much as the crowd. Sergeant Miller stepped forward, voice low but firm. A salute is never meaningless, Grant. Not from a soldier. Grant spun, rage flashing. You keep your mouth shut, Miller. But Miller didn't. His eyes remained fixed on the old man. Whoever he is, those men know him. And that means he's somebody worth listening to. The townsfolk leaned closer together, their fear shifting into wonder. The butcher whispered to his wife, I haven't seen soldiers in formation since the old parades. Whoever he is, he must have led men once, maybe still does. Grant stomped toward the old man, standing so close, their breath mingled. His voice dropped to a hiss. You think you're better than me? Walking in here, making me look weak? I don't care who you used to be, you're nothing now, nothing. The old man's eyes glimmered, calm, yet unyielding. His reply was simple. Respect isn't lost when it's earned the hard way. It's carried even when men like you try to strip it away. The words landed like hammer strikes. The tall soldier dropped his salute, but only to step forward one. Boots striking pavement with authority. His hand rested near his sidearm, not in threat, but in unmistakable readiness. The other soldiers mirrored the motion, a ripple of discipline that sent shivers down the spines of everyone watching. The crowd stirred louder now. They're protecting him.
Hey, why would they protect an old man?
Unless he's...
Not just any old man. Grant's throat worked as he swallowed hard, his smirk twitching at the edges. He raised his voice once more, but now it sounded desperate. Back off. This is my town. You don't come in here and take it over with your little show. But no one clapped. No one laughed. No one backed him up. The balance of power had shifted before everyone's eyes. The soldiers stood like a wall behind the old man, and the people of the town began to shift closer, drawn to him, their trust leaning his way. For the first time, Officer Grant looked small, and the old man, with nothing but his cane and his silence, looked larger than life. The square had become a stage, and the story was no longer about the officer's arrogance. It was about the return of a dignity too powerful to be erased. The square no longer felt like the town's own. It had become something else, a place of reckoning, of revelation. The soldier's silent protection turned the old man into a figure larger than the cobblestones beneath his cane. Children sat on their father's shoulders, eyes wide with awe. The shopkeepers abandoned their counters, doors swinging open, as though instinct demanded they witness this moment. Who is he? His voice is carried through the air. Someone important, I'll wager. Look at the soldiers. They don't move like that for just anyone. At the center of it all, the old man remained. Still, his weathered hand resting on the handle of his cane. His eyes were far away, as though seeing something beyond the square battles fought, commands given, lives changed. Officer Grant's chest heaved with rage. He marched forward again, voice sharp. Enough of this charade. You think you can? Waltz into my town? Stand here with your little fan club? And make me look like a fool? The old man turned his head slowly, his gaze settling on Grant. You don't need my help to look like a fool, he said calmly. Laughter rippled quietly among the crowd, nervous but genuine. Grant's face flushed crimson, veins standing out. Along his neck, big words for a man leaning on a stick, Grant spat. He snatched the old man's notebook off the precinct counter where it still lay and raised it high for everyone to see. This is all you've got left, scribbles and faded memories. You think a book makes you somebody? The old man's voice was quiet, but it carried. That book holds the names of men who never came home. Men who saluted me before they walked into fire. Men who gave their lives so you could stand here, mocking the ground they died to protect. The square fell silent. Even the birds seemed to still. Grant's hand faltered on the notebook. He opened it at random, eyes flicking over the handwritten pages. Lists of names, dates, coordinates, medals awarded. Brief notes scrawled in the margins, remembrances of valor, of sacrifice. One name caught his eye, underlined twice. A soldier decorated for bravery. His jaw clenched. The stories were real. But Grant snapped the book shut and barked louder, as though shouting could erase what he'd read. Stories, old stories. Nobody cares anymore. Times have changed. You're nothing but a relic. The old man raised his cane slightly, tapping it once against the stone beneath his feet. The sound rang clear, sharp as a drum beat. The soldiers straightened at once, like a ripple of memory triggered by that single sound. Gasps filled the air. "Did you see that?" They moved when he tapped his cane. "It's a signal," he commanded them. Grant shook his head violently. "Coincidence? You're all imagining things?" But his voice cracked, brittle against the weight of the truth pressing in. The old man's gaze swept the crowd, then returned to Grant. "Respect isn't erased by time. It's carved into the hearts of those who remember." One of the soldiers finally broke silence. His voice was steady, carrying across the square. "Sir, we haven't forgotten." The words hit like thunder. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Grant staggered a step back, shaking his head. No, this isn't real. You can't just show up after all these years and expect us to bow." But nobody bowed to Grant. Their eyes were fixed on the old man, who hadn't asked for anything yet was receiving the respect Grant craved and never earned. A child's voice pierced the murmurs. "Mama, was he their leader?" The mother's eyes shone with realization. "He wasn't just their leader's son, he is their leader." Grant's laugh came out jagged, desperate. "You're all fools. A cane, a notebook, and a salute don't make him anything. It's just an old man trying to feel important." But deep inside, his hands trembled. His voice quivered. And though he tried to laugh, the sound was hollow, because somewhere in his gut, he already knew the truth. He was standing against a man whose shadow stretched far longer than his badge ever could, and the town could see it too. The murmurs of the crowd swelled, no longer questions but dawning realizations. The square, once ruled by Officer Grant's voice, now belonged to the silence surrounding the old man. It was a silence heavy with respect, a silence waiting for truth. One soldier finally stepped forward, removing his cap. His voice trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. "This man," he said, gesturing toward the elder with the cane. "He is no ordinary citizen. Know him. We all know him. Decades ago, when I was a boy, my father served under his command." Gasps rose from the crowd. The old man lowered his gaze, the corners of his eyes crinkling. He had never asked for recognition, but fate was dragging it into the light. Another soldier joined in, his words crisp. "We trained under men who spoke his name with pride, stories of impossible missions, of battles won against the odds, of a leader who never left his men behind." The elder's hands tightened around his cane. His mind slipped just for a heartbeat into the past. Smoke filled the valley. Gunfire cracked the air. Young men looked to him, their faces pale with fear, their futures hanging on his command. He remembered lifting his hand, steady and sure, signaling the charge that turned despair into victory. The flashback burned behind his eyes, as vivid as if it had happened yesterday. His throat constricted, but he remained composed. Grant barked, his voice cracking. "Stories, myths. Soldiers tell tales to make themselves feel braver. None of this proves anything." But the old man finally spoke, his voice deep, carrying weight no badge could replicate. "Your uniform may give you authority for a day." "Officer," he said, his cane tapping the ground once more. "But mine gave me responsibility for life's responsibility. I bore every moment, even when the world forgot." The cane's echo lingered, and in that instant the square seemed to breathe with him. A woman in the crowd spoke softly, almost a whisper, but it carried. "What was his name in the war?" The first soldier straightened, saluting. "Colonel Nathaniel Harris, commander of the Iron Battalion, decorated with the Medal of Honor." The name cut through the square like lightning. People gasped, some covering their mouths in disbelief. Children turned to their parents, eyes wide. The older townsfolk exchanged looks of recognition. They had read the name in history books, seen it whispered in faded articles. Grant's mouth fell open, then snapped shut. No, that's impossible. He's just some old man wandering. In here, with a cane and a notebook? He can't be. But the soldier interrupted him firmly. "Sir, he is. And I would salute him even if he had no medals, no titles, no battalion left. Because leadership like his doesn't die. It lives in the men he led, in the ground we stand on, in the freedom you take for granted while mocking him." The soldiers moved in unison, raising their hands in a crisp salute toward Colonel Harris. The crowd held its breath. For a moment, time froze. The old man Colonel Harris shifted slightly, his cane steadying him, and returned their salute with trembling dignity. His arm moved slowly, but the gesture radiated strength. The air itself seemed to grow thicker with reverence. People whispered in awe. "He really is the colonel. All these years, and he's here in our square. A living legend." Officer Grant staggered back, his authority crumbling with every heartbeat. His badge, once a symbol of power, suddenly felt like a scrap of tin compared to the weight of history standing before him. You think this changes anything?" Grant shouted desperately. "This is my town, my rules. I don't care what kind of medals he had. He's nothing now." Even his words fell flat. For the first time, the crowd wasn't looking at Grant. They weren't listening to him at all. Their eyes were fixed on Colonel Harris, their hearts anchored in the presence of a man who had carried entire generations on his shoulders. The old man's voice rose again, unwavering. "Respect isn't demanded by shouting, officer. It's earned through sacrifice." The soldiers echoed in unison, "Through sacrifice." The words reverberated through the square like a vow, and in that moment, everyone knew the truth. The laughter that had once mocked the old man now echoed back his shame against the officer, and Grant, his face pale, his fists trembling, was the only man who still refused to bow to history. The square no longer belonged to Officer Grant. It was clear in the silence that followed the salute, clear in the way every pair of eyes had shifted away from him, landing instead on the old man they now knew as Colonel Harris. Grant's breathing grew ragged. His authority was crumbling like sand in his hands, and panic made his voice shrill. "Enough of this nonsense," he barked, clutching at his holster as if the cold steel might anchor him. "I don't care who you say he is. This is my town, and in my town, the law listens to me." The soldiers did not flinch. Their stance was firm, their gazes unwavering. They had seen men far more terrifying than this officer. Grant's anger was nothing compared to battlefields they had trained to honor. Colonel Harris remained still, his cane steady, his eyes calm. He did not need to raise his voice. His silence alone was enough to counter the storm brewing in Grant. The crowd, however, began to murmur, their whispers louder now. "Can't talk to him like that. He's a hero. Fought for this country when men like Grant were still children." Grant whipped around at the voices, his face twisted with rage. "Quiet, all of you." His words cracked through the air, but instead of obedience, he was met with stares firm, unblinking stares of defiance. Something inside him snapped. He yanked his gun halfway from its holster, waving it carelessly in the air. The gasp that went through the crowd was sharp and unified. Mothers clutched their children. Old men clenched their jaws, but the soldiers did not move back. In fact, they stepped forward as one. "Put the weapon down, officer," one commanded. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of absolute certainty. Grant's hand trembled. Though he tried to hide it, "I said I'm the law here." "No," another soldier corrected, his voice like iron. "You're a man with a badge, but a badge without honor is just metal." The crowd erupted in murmurs again, louder now, bolder. Grant's face flushed red, veins pulsing in his neck. "You all think you can turn on me?" he shouted. "For him? An old man with a cane?" But the colonel finally raised his head. His voice, calm but resonant, silenced the square. "Not an old man," Harris said, his eyes meeting Grant's with steady fire. "A man who carried hundreds through fire when fear consumed them. A man who buried brothers so this flag could still fly. You don't mock me, officer. You mock every sacrifice that bought you the freedom to wear that badge." The soldiers raised their salutes again, this time sharper, louder the sound of hands meeting brows, cutting the silence like thunder. The crowd erupted into cheers. Colonel Harris," he shouted, voices overlapping, swelling into something unshakable. Grant stumbled back, the sound overwhelming him. His badge felt heavy on his chest, but not with pride, with shame. The more the people chanted, the smaller he became. But his pride was a beast unwilling to die. His voice cracked as he screamed, "Shut up! All of you shut up!" He aimed his gun directly at the colonel. A scream ripped from the crowd. People ducked, mothers shielded their children. But the soldiers surged forward in an instant, forming a protective wall in front of Harris. Their boots slammed into the ground in perfect unison, like thunder rolling across the earth. One soldier's voice boomed, "You will not raise a weapon against a Medal of Honor recipient." Another added, "Stand down now, or you disgrace not just yourself, but every man who ever wore that uniform." Grant's hands shook violently. Sweat poured down his forehead. He looked at the soldiers, at the unshakable wall of loyalty before him, then at the crowd faces filled with fury and disgust. He's no longer afraid of him. For the first time, Grant felt the sting of isolation. The badge that once commanded obedience now seemed like a curse. Colonel Harris's voice cut through the tension one last time, firm yet almost sorrowful. "Son," he said, his tone heavy with meaning, "power without respect is the fastest way to lose both. Today you will learn that lesson, whether you want to or not." The words hung in the air, a prophecy written in stone. Grant's finger twitched near the trigger. The soldiers tensed, ready to act. The crowd held its breath, time itself pausing on the brink of explosion. And in that suspended moment, everyone knew Officer Grant's reign of arrogance was seconds from shattering. "Officer." Grant's hands shook violently as he gripped his gun, the metal cold and heavy against his palm. His chest heaved with shallow breaths, each inhale sharp, rattling. As the weight of history and honor bore down on him, the soldiers stood firm in front of Colonel Harris, a human wall of unwavering loyalty. Their eyes met his, calm yet hard, and in that gaze, he saw the reflection of every man who had served under Harris, every man who would never bow to arrogance. "Step aside," Grant barked, his voice cracking, "or I swear I will know." The word came in unison from the soldiers, low, unyielding. The sound of iron snapping against stone. The crowd pressed closer, sensing the culmination of years of tension. They were no longer spectators. They were witnesses, participants, arbiters of justice. Grant's rage boiled. "Do you hear me? I am the law. I enforce it. You will." He didn't finish. A chorus of voices rose behind the soldiers, shouting a single, undeniable truth. "He is our leader. He is our hero." The sound was a physical blow. Grant's knees threatened to buckle. The badge over his heart felt like a stone, dragging him down. His gun wavered in his grasp, useless, meaningless against the tide of collective respect for Colonel Harris. A single young soldier stepped forward. Calmly, deliberately, he reached for Grant's chest. With a firm motion, he unclipped the badge, the symbol of Grant's stolen authority, and lifted it for all to see. Gasps erupted. Mothers cried out. Children cheered. The badge gleamed in the sunlight, now weightless, empty of meaning. Grant clawed at it, lips trembling. "Give that back. That is mine. I am the law." But the officer's words were swallowed by the square. The soldiers' hands were steady. The townsfolk pressed closer, their faces firm with resolve. Grant's threats fell flat, meaningless. Against the weight of the colonel's legacy and the unity it inspired, Colonel Harris finally spoke. His voice calm, steady, every word a hammer striking truth. "Authority," he said, "is not taken. It is earned. And you, officer, have spent your life trying to buy it with fear and bluster. Today, you learn the cost of arrogance." Grant's knees buckled, and he sank to the ground. The badge lifted from his chest like a crown torn away. He screamed a high, desperate sound, but no one moved to comfort him. No one needed to. The lesson had been delivered in full view of everyone. The crowd began to chant, softly at first, then louder. "Colonel Harris. Colonel Harris." The soldiers lifted their arms in salute once more, perfectly synchronized, reinforcing the truth that the man in the center, the old man with the cane, was more than a legend. He was living history, a symbol of sacrifice, honor, and courage. Grant's chest heaved, eyes wide, hands clawing at empty air. The power he had clung to for years had evaporated in moments. The badge, the gun. Even the uniform could not shield him from the weight of earned respect. A boy in the crowd whispered to his mother, "Mom, he's broken." "Yes," she replied softly, "and he deserved it." Colonel Harris turned his gaze toward Grant one last time. "Learn this, if nothing else," he said, voice firm. "Dignity cannot be stolen. Honor cannot be faked. Respect. Respect is never yours to demand." Grant finally slumped fully onto the ground. His own arrogance collapsed like a house of cards. The town square was still. The only sound, the tapping of Colonel Harris's cane against the stone, a rhythm that had carried through battles, sacrifices, and now justice. The soldiers stepped back, leaving the colonel standing alone, calm and resolute. The townsfolk surged forward, surrounding him in reverent silence, their eyes bright with understanding, their hearts anchored in the presence of someone who had earned every ounce of respect in the world. Grant lay on the ground, defeated. His badge shining in the sun, but empty, stripped of power, stripped of pride, stripped of relevance. The collapse was complete, and in the square, history had reclaimed its rightful place. The sun dipped low, casting long shadows across the square, but the light seemed to follow Colonel Harris. He stood at the center, cane steady, eyes calm, watching. As the soldiers fell into precise formation behind him, their boots struck the pavement in a rhythm that resonated through the hearts of every onlooker. The town had shifted around him. People leaned from windows, clustered along streets, murmuring, pointing, whispering reverence and awe.
Children
Sat on shoulders, wide-eyed, witnessing history unfold in their own backyard. Officer Grant slouched against the side of the precinct, his hands empty, badge gone, chest heaving. His voice, once so commanding, was now swallowed by the hum of admiration. For the colonel, every step he had taken to assert authority had crumbled, leaving him small, irrelevant, and isolated. Colonel Harris finally raised his voice, calm but carrying to every corner of the square. "Today," he said, "we remember what leadership truly means. It is not intimidation. It is not fear. It is responsibility, honor, and the courage to put others before oneself." The soldiers saluted sharply in perfect unison, their gestures a living testament to the years of respect and loyalty Harris had earned. The sound of synchronized boots and crisp salutes filled the air. Like a drumbeat of justice, the crowd erupted in cheers, a swelling wave of voices praising the man who had carried so much, fought so bravely, and yet stood quietly, humbly in the center of it all. Colonel Harris. Colonel Harris. They chanted, their voices layered with awe and gratitude. Grant's hands trembled. He wanted to speak, to reclaim some shred of power, but the words stuck in his throat. The badge he had clutched for authority now gleamed from a soldier's hand in full sunlight, a symbol of power gone hollow. A young boy tugged at his mother's sleeve. "Mom, he's amazing. He really led them." "Yes, son," she whispered, eyes glistening. "And today, everyone saw it." Colonel Harris looked out at the crowd, then at the soldiers behind him. His gaze softened, almost imperceptibly, and he tapped his cane lightly against the stone. The sound, sharp and deliberate, was met with a resounding echo as the soldiers straightened. Saluting once more, the symbolism was unmistakable. A man who had once led men into the fiercest fires had now led his town to understand what true respect and honor meant. Grant, defeated, finally slumped to his knees. His chest heaved, eyes wide, realizing that authority built on fear is fragile, hollow, and fleeting. His voice cracked, a pitiful echo of what it once was. This isn't fair." But no one listened. The town had turned away, leaving him to face the weight of his own arrogance. His badge was no longer a shield, it was a relic, a symbol of all he had failed to earn. Colonel Harris took a step forward, voice steady, carrying both warmth and steel. "Learn this, Officer Grant. Respect is not given because you demand it. Respect is earned through deeds, through courage, and through integrity." Without these, your badge is meaningless. Grant's lips trembled. No retort came. No power remained. The crowd surged forward now, surrounding Harris in admiration. Soldiers clasped his shoulders, some saluting once more, others placing hands firmly on his back in reassurance and loyalty. The town square became a living mosaic of gratitude, honor, and recognition. Children cheered. Shopkeepers wiped tears from their eyes. Mothers hugged sons, fathers nodded in solemn acknowledgement. The city had witnessed the full arc of justice. Honor restored not through punishment alone, but through dignity, courage, and undeniable truth. Harris finally straightened, raising his cane with quiet authority, scanning the faces around him. His voice rose once more, calm yet commanding. Remember this day. Remember that integrity lasts longer than arrogance. That courage outlives fear. That respect cannot be stolen, it can only be earned. The soldiers saluted again, a final crescendo of honor. The crowd erupted, and the sound carried through the town like a living heartbeat. And as for Officer Grant, he remained in the shadows, chest heaving, powerless, his badge gone. His authority dismantled by truth, courage, and decades of earned respect. Colonel Harris, steady as stone, with the soldiers behind him and the town before him, finally allowed a small, satisfied smile. Justice had been served not with violence, but with dignity, honor, and the unwavering weight of history. The sun set completely now, golden light spilling over the square. The town had witnessed not just a confrontation, but a lesson that true leadership, like true respect, endures far beyond time, titles, or badges. And in that square on that day, honor had been fully restored.